Yeah, I think if I were to go back and talk to the younger me about that situation, it would have been don't try to shortcut. Don't try to take the shortcut path when you are on a really solid trajectory. Just like follow that line. And if you're not, then great. If you're not in a position where you can see career progression, where you are growing as an individual, absolutely think critically and go evaluate what's out there, right?
Unfinished Business Podcast Show with your host, David Slyman.
Welcome to the Unfinished Business Podcast Show. I am your host, Dave Slyman. And as always, we explore the journeys of remarkable leaders in the business space. We talk about their strategies, their decisions, how they've gotten to where they are today. And I got to tell you what, I'm super thrilled about our guest. Jay Pettigrew today is on our show. He's the Vice President of Sales at Parspec. And this is going to be a great show because if you're thinking about upping your game, leveling up as a professional, and moving into an executive leadership role, it's going to be a great story. Jay really started as an intern at Salesforce and now as a senior vice president leader in a different industry. But more importantly, he's going to talk about his journey, and I'm excited to dive into that. So sit back, relax, and enjoy this show, and we're going to jump right into it. So Jay, welcome to the show. Appreciate you being here.
Thanks for having me. Excited to be here.
Awesome, man. Great. Well, listen, let's talk about your career beginnings, okay? We're going to go through this journey and where you are today, but take us back to when you were that intern at Salesforce and kind of the landscape at that point, because you're still a young guy. I mean, holy smokes, man. I mean, you're still young.
Yeah. So to take it back to like the decision criteria for me. So when I was graduating college, it was a little bit of a difficult work environment that I was coming out of. So I went to school in San
Okay.
Diego, which wasn't a great place for freshly graduated people with a business degree. Not a lot of up and coming tech startups to pick from. So
San
ironically,
Diego, right?
I was picking between a job at Salesforce as an intern, which at the time it was a small company and not too well known of or heard of, or going to work at like I think it was Hess Equipment Rental. So that was you could have seen my career going on a different trajectory. But I had a mentor of mine, which we'll get into in a little bit later.
Yeah.
Who said, go join a company where there's a huge growth potential and where you can learn from the inside how really good businesses operate and just prove yourself and prove valuable within that organization. And there'll be a lot of room to run. And that was really good advice I got. And so that was when I went into Salesforce as an intern, that was the perspective that I took is how could I get my MBA on Salesforce as a business? And in doing so, how can I prove myself a valuable asset beyond just the role that I'm doing, but in general to the organization?
That's such a great point. I want to cut you off there, but we need to clip that because I think that's such great advice. You got great advice from a mentor early listen, there's no right or wrong path, but that's just, advice on a path that worked for you. And I think it was a good one. So yeah, keep going. Sorry. I wanted to make sure I chimed in on that.
No, that's really the point of it. And so from there, what I always thought about was how do I excel and be the best or in the top 5% at my current job? And once I achieve that, how do I start setting myself up for what that next job or next two opportunities might be that I want? And how do I build the mentors to get me there? How do I start to build the skill set to get me there? And how do I start to build a resume that would get me there? And so that was always the step that I took along that path as I, climbed a pretty steep corporate ladder, as you might imagine.
Yeah.
There.
Well, I mean, let's dig into it because you made a point here. One of the things you have to do is get a really good mentor, and I recommend that wholeheartedly. I've had some great influential people in my career that have helped me level up. Talk to us about one of those first mentors. I mean, you're in Salesforce, right? And I think at that time, what'd you say it was like I think it was 7,000 employees at that time. So still, I mean, I'm not going to say it's a small company. It's not, but based on where they are today, it's definitely a smaller company. But talk to us about how you vetted that or how that all happened for you.
So I think it starts with identifying someone who stylistically you can follow, to me, I always wanted to have someone who was a couple years ahead of me, 5 years ahead of me, and then hopefully 10 to 15 years ahead of me. And I would treat those relationships a little bit differently. And so I would look for someone who I admired as a human being, not just as a professional, right? Because like it's a
Great
lot
point.
easier to work for and to try to mold yourself after someone if you look up to them as an individual versus just for their work habits.
Yeah.
So that was one thing that I did. And then once you identify those people, for me it was, how do you organically find ways to add value for that
Okay.
individual? Like what are the things that you can just see that are a nuisance in their day to day, and how can you just like proactively offer to help out?
Nice.
A simple example would be, there was a guy who was an account executive back when I was an intern, and I knew that he really liked to have well researched accounts and territory plans. That was a really arduous task for him. So I offered to stay after work one day and like, all right, let's grab a bottle of whiskey and let's just bang this thing out for the next 6 hours. And
Nice.
we just spent a Thursday night where I was just trying to help him out. Like, hey, I would send him 10 accounts. Here's the research I've done. Give me real time coaching on it. And for him, it accelerated that process. I knew he was going to do it at night. So I gave him a friend to do it with, or someone who's sitting there next to him, camaraderie and doing it. And it made an arduous, labor intensive task a little bit easier for him because he had a second set of hands doing it. And for me, I got to get extremely valuable insights on how I should be thinking about molding my career. And it built a relationship that, I mean, to this day, he's still someone that I lean on. But like looking for those type of organic moments where you can add value for someone beyond just going
Yeah.
to them for mentorship is always something that I think is leads to a more fruitful and more helpful and meaningful relationship, I guess.
I think that is such a huge point. We look to mentors for, gaining value from them and learning from them. But you actually went across, think about this, everybody, okay? And every day in life, whether it's personally or professionally, if you want to create a great relationship, think about giving them value versus you getting value out of what they offer. Even though they're successful and are doing all these things, make sure that you bring something to the table as well. And Jay, I think that is such a huge point that you bring to the table here, because I don't think most people look at it that way. And even people who I work with that, want to learn more, I really try to identify that as well. Like, what can you bring to the table? So I think it's a great point.
Yeah, and that can look a lot of different ways, right? Like it can
Yeah.
be doing grunt work for them because they're a busy person who has high skill work to be done, and so you just want to take something off their plate. It also could be if and they're in a leadership position and they're two levels removed from you. One of the challenges that people in that position have is they lose sight of what the ground, like the ground level playing field actually looks like, right? They lose sight
Yeah.
of like they're not as in touch with what's going on at the ground zero. And so you can provide those insights back to them. Like it doesn't have to be that you're just providing your own point of view. It can be that you're doing extra work for them. It can be that you're just providing insights from a different point of view that is valuable to them, right? Like it doesn't have to be one certain way or another.
It's fantastic. That's fantastic. So listen, you obviously were in an organization that was growing and it was very competitive. So now you've kind of got some mentors that you're working with, and I say that quote unquote working with. Um, how did you rise in your leadership in such a competitive organization that was, I would say, probably in the years you were there, were growing by leaps and bounds?
It was interesting. I think there was a culture that was instilled there that I still appreciate. And I don't think it's seen as much from the outside, but there was such a competitive nature within Salesforce, not just around who could have the best year from a sales performance perspective, but who could get
Hmm.
promoted faster. I remember we used to fight over who could get promoted in 9 months instead of 10 months, who could get promoted in 18 months instead of 24 months, right? Like that was such a badge of honor. And like we had this this class of folks that you were rising through the ranks with, and we all the measuring stick was always like, who did you start with, and were you one level or two levels ahead of them? And that was like how we all thought, which was just such an interesting business
Wow.
dynamic that I don't think gets replicated
Yeah.
elsewhere. So that was the lens that I looked at it through, was how can you exceed, because everyone needs to exceed in performance, but how do you also do all the other things that will get you that promotion and will make you stand out compared to your peers, that so it's not just the numbers, that you also have the relationships, that you also have gone and added value in other ways outside of just delivering revenue to the company. So
Wow, that See, I would never think that. What a culture you build within the organization. Because as we all know, the cream rises to the top, right? And uh, I'm sure those are people you still stay in touch with. I'm sure some of
Oh
them you
yeah.
stay in touch with today
Oh
because
yeah.
of just that cultural. Was there a point where you knew, like, man, I am really like in a special place going through the time? Because sometimes when you're in the weeds, it's
Yeah.
tough to see. Look, I've been there running organizations and building organizations. When you're in the weeds, it's tough to see things, and that's why I really enjoy the consulting work I do now, because I don't work inside out. I work a lot more outside in. But
Yeah.
was there a point where you kind of sat back and said, wow, this is pretty amazing, what's going on here?
It's really funny. I realized that it was probably been, let's date back to probably 2015, 2016. And I was on this
Uh-huh.
team where it's just like you look to your left and you look to your right, and it was just like these super impressive mid 20s, early 30s folks that everyone was working hard. We all enjoyed working together. It was all like really smart people. Like they could just
Yeah.
pick up what you were putting down really quickly. They would challenge you. And I remember we were at like a Thanksgiving potluck, and we just like, this can't be normal, and we all had that realization. And then the ironic thing was at that same time, I got poached by a mentor of mine for this big
Mhm.
job at Oracle, and it had, 2x the salary. It was whatever territory I wanted. I could accelerate my career by 5 years by taking this job. And it took him like 6 months to win me over in spite of how like appealing that sounded, because I knew how
Oh,
special it
yeah.
was. And then
Yeah.
eventually I took the job,
Uh-huh.
and I left within 3 months and I came back to Salesforce. So I don't even know if it's on my LinkedIn resume anymore, but I only lasted 3 months because I knew how special it was what I had. And in
Yeah.
spite of that, I still sacrificed it to try to shortcut a little bit. And it turns out that wasn't the right move. So
Well, let's unpack that a little bit, because there might be some people out there that are kind of going through that same deal, right? Where
yeah.
they're in a really good environment, competitive environment, they feel strongly about it, but they get an offer that from the outside in, it looks fantastic. But then when you get inside out, you're going, oh shoot, I made a mistake here. Is there any advice you could give anybody in you know unpacking that a little bit more and making a decision? Obviously, it worked out for you. You're able to come back. But what were some of the things that you would recommend people do, professionals do, in maybe in a opportunity like that, or in a situation like that?
Yeah, I think if I were to go back and talk to the younger me about that
Mhm.
situation, it would have been, don't try to shortcut. Don't try to take the shortcut path when you are on a really solid trajectory. Just like follow that line. And if you're
Yeah.
not, then great. If you're not in a position where you can see career progression, where you are growing as an individual, absolutely think critically and go
Okay.
evaluate what's out there, right? That's the
Great.
first thing. If you're on the right trajectory, I don't care if you have a chance to accelerate or get a little bit more money, it's not going to be worth it. But if you're at a point where there's stagnation, where you're not growing, where you don't have the right leadership, where they don't recognize what you're doing, absolutely go take a look, right?
Yeah.
And then once you do, if you do take that leap and you do decide to leave, like, don't be afraid to fail fast. I think that everyone is
Yeah.
worried about having, too many like job hoppy things on their resume, or that they want to stick it out, right? Like, I think
Yeah.
failing slow is much more dangerous than failing fast. So I got lucky. I was going to fail slow at Oracle. I was there for 3 months, and I
Uh-huh.
wanted to stick it out. But I was back in San Francisco just to catch up with some old friends, and I happened to grab coffee with an old boss, and like this was so impactful for me. I sat there and he's like, he had another job. He's like, hey, if you're not, you don't sound like you're the same energized Jay that I know. Like, why don't you come back? And I was like,
Yeah.
well, I want to stick it out for at least another year. Like, I want to test this thing out. And he's like, why? What's the difference between a year and today? Like, you'll have this job that I'm giving you. You know, you like this place. You know that you can be
Environment.
successful here. Why not start on Monday?
And you're like
And I
thinking
just
about
I
it,
just
right?
sat here and I was like, I live in San Diego. All my stuff's down there. I could just rent a U-Haul. And that was on the Thursday. I was in San Francisco, and I came back and quit my job and started on Monday. And like
Oh
that,
man.
like, I'm glad I didn't sit that out, because I could only imagine the me that would have come back to Salesforce after 12 months of sitting on my hands. And twiddling my thumbs and trying to make it work in an environment that I wasn't being challenged, I probably wouldn't have been as successful when I came back, because they wouldn't be getting the same like energized version of me. They would be getting some version of me that was 80% lower with the gas in the tank. So
Wow. Fantastic story, man. Fantastic story. What was one of the most pivotal moments in the Salesforce career that significantly shaped, your trajectory as you were growing up in that company?
so probably when we were making a pivot where we were starting to become a world that farmed on our customers, right? Like we had been this startup for a while that was just moving into new verticals. We are grabbing up market share. We were crushing it with new logos and expanding existing relationships. And then there hit this point where we started to become more of the farming company, where we had a pretty large customer base and we were really relying on expanding our existing customer base, making new acquisitions. Like we went on an acquisition spree during that period where we were spending billions of dollars to acquire new companies that we could then go market and sell to our existing customer base. At that point, I think our CEO, Mark, had recognized that we still, in order to hit the growth numbers of a $30 billion company in the next 8 years or whatever it was at that time, we had to continue to excel at that new logo business. And the reason I say this is that was a pivot that was scary to a lot of folks. Like the top performers
Yeah.
were all going after who could win the best. Like, could you get that promotion to own the relationship with the sexiest customer? And for me, I
Yeah.
saw that, like, I had a mentor who said, that's going to be a sink or swim environment in that new logo world. But if you can excel in new logo, that's going to be a far more transferable skill set that you'll develop. And if you can exceed
Hmm.
there, that's going to be like the true grounds where you cut your teeth and you'll be able to have a lot more opportunity. Just go grind it out and be successful in that. So I took a risk on that. And that made a huge launch in my career. And that allowed me to get my first VP position within Salesforce. And that was what probably ultimately did allow me to take some shortcuts, but it was due to the hard work that I put in versus like having
Yeah.
some connection that I got. So that
I
ended up being the
love it.
thing that really paid off for me was taking a risk on new logo, going and having success in what was a hard place to have success, and from that being able to parlay that into a leadership position.
That's fantastic. I always say this. Listen, everyone says, don't work harder, work smarter, right? I say, listen, you have to earn the right. You have to work hard in order to earn the right to work smarter. I'm going to say it one more time. You have to work hard in order to earn the right to work smarter. And that is what it comes down to. And it really reflects what you were talking about earlier, is the reflection of not taking shortcuts. Listen, you can earn shortcuts, but taking shortcuts can really hold you back or put you, like you said, maybe not excel as much as you want to excel. So
I'm
I'm a
stealing
big
that one
believer in
from
that.
you. I'm stealing that one from
Okay.
you because I feel
Yeah.
like I've tried to find a concise way to make that point, and
Yeah.
that was the way to do it. So
Yeah.
I'm taking that
Yeah.
one.
You have to work harder in order to earn the right to work smarter.
Yeah.
Um, so that's good. I'm glad we got something out of that today. All right. So let's talk about your transition. I want to fast forward, and then I'm going to ask you some questions because you've been in this leadership role before. I want to talk to you about that, but let's talk about Parspec.
Yep.
What motivated you after Salesforce for 12 years to take on this challenge as the VP of sales for this organization?
So it was a couple of things. I was starting to feel that I was getting really comfortable at Salesforce, right? There's the golden
Okay.
handcuffs that you can get when you're in a position where there's corporate strategies that they do to make sure that there's a financial thing that you are locked into if you stay at the company. And it was easy, right? I'd been in the same type of role for 5 years at that point. And I wouldn't say the job was easy, but I wasn't really continuing to grow and find new challenges and unlock new versions of myself. I was actually starting to stagnate. So I started to recognize that, and I don't want to be in that position. And I thought I could blink and I could wake up and I could be retiring, and I would never have gone out and like re-challenged myself at another company.
Good for you,
Um,
man.
and I didn't want to be in that position. And so the other piece to it was I'd had a lot of startups reach out to me, and I'd always wanted to try the startup world, but they had always been one of two things. It had been some small widget that, in my mind, the Salesforce, SAP, Workday, ServiceNow of the world, that they could overnight go build that widget and they could put those people out of business.
Yeah.
Or or it
Okay.
was some company that wanted to solve world hunger and they only had $100 million, and like you're not going to solve world hunger with $100 million.
I
So,
understand. It's a good
so
perspective.
I hit that point where I was like, man, I'm really not growing or moving on in my career, and I'm afraid that I'll wake up and I'll hit that. I'm 60 years old, and what have I done besides climb the corporate ladder? So I hit that
Yeah.
point at a similar time when Parspec reached out to me, and I liked that they were tackling a really big problem, which was building costs and construction in the U.S. are too high, and that's causing a lot of problems. And there hasn't been a lot of innovation in the construction industry for a long time. But at the same time, AI is starting to come, and that is something that can unleash a lot of efficiencies in the construction
Yeah.
space. And at the same time, the CEO was taking a very practical approach to where to enter trying to help solve that problem versus trying to solve something really big. Like he took a really narrow approach to solving
Yeah.
one part of the problem, where then from there you could pivot off to a few different
You
avenues. Yeah.
different avenues. Great. Yeah. So give everybody a little more insight of the company. It's I guess its mission as a whole, so they know where you are today, and that'll give them some context.
Yeah, absolutely. So Parspec is an AI-driven company that helps distributors be able to better service their customers and by providing bids more quickly today. That's what we're doing
Yeah.
right now. So the idea is there's a lot of labor hours that are spent taking, say, a drawing for a new uh, let's say
Building.
building for either it's like a multifamily home unit or it's a stadium or a hospital. Well, if you
Gotcha.
take a drawing for something like that and then you say, give me all the components that are needed from a material perspective to build this thing, that's a pretty arduous manual labor task right now. So Parspec
Yeah.
is coming in and we're using AI to crawl the websites of manufacturers in order to be able to bring that information, make it a little bit less manual labor to match the right products and specs to a drawing or
Amazing.
to a RFP.
Fantastic. Fantastic. So, and let's talk also dig in a little bit of the context and the size of the organization. You went from 80,000 now to 40
Yeah,
people in a company, which listen, that's a space I grew up in, the startups and the 50 to 100 people in a business. It's a different environment. How have you adapted to that? What are some of the things that you like about it and the differences as well?
yeah. I think some of the fun to it is everyone here is just mission driven, right? Like you don't come
Yeah.
work at a startup like that unless you're fully bought into the vision. Like you're not just there to rest invest like some folks might be, or to cash a paycheck or whatever it might be, right? Like you believe in the mission and you're highly motivated for that. So like it's energizing to surround yourself with folks like that. So
Love
that's
it.
that's one piece to it. Um, there's also such a lack of bureaucracy that it can be a little bit stark to me. Like I still have PTSD because we'll have an idea in a meeting and then it's like, let's go action on that. And like, let's go put this into place. I'm like, wait, don't we need to like think about this a little bit more before we go do it? Which is, that's a double-edged sword because sometimes
Right.
you can move fast and you're not thinking about all the downstream impacts of that. But I think we've done a pretty dang good job of being able to like, when do we need to pause and spend a little bit more time on it? But
Yeah.
that's just been one of my observations. That makes it fun, but at the same time, you're getting a little close to touching the stove.
Yeah, it goes back to what you said earlier, fail fast, right? Like I
Yeah,
just remember when I had my one my startup, we had did custom software and I worked on this project. We worked on this project to develop the software so it would do ad approvals. Any case, it took us like a year to figure out that wasn't going to work. That is way too long. And I did not fail fast. But I guess the idea, as long as you're doing a good job of that, which it sounds like you guys are, it'll ease a lot of pain.
yeah, absolutely. So it's
Yeah,
been fun. Like I guess that's the one thing I'd say is like it's fun.
yeah,
You're solving hard problems. It's not like this is an easy industry to break into, right? Like there's a lot of resistance to change. People have a lot of let's call it flat inertia, where it's hard to get the ball rolling on things. But once that ball does start rolling, it's really gratifying and exciting to
right.
see the progress that can be made. So
That's great. That's fantastic. Um, Anything on your side that's a little challenging for you? You know,
I think we run into that challenge where um, at an executive level, Parspec makes a lot of sense. And to a lot of end users, they get really excited about it. They see it,
Mhm.
it just opens up their eyes and they get really excited, like, oh my goodness, I'm not going to have so much manual labor. Like, this is going to allow me to really change the way I do business. And for those people, it's really exciting. And then there's also folks who will look at it and it'll be a little bit intimidating, right? The idea of
Mhm.
AI is AI coming to replace our jobs. Like, um, at the end of the day, I see it like it's a tool in someone's hands that can make you more powerful. Like I always think that there's a really powerful Steve Jobs quote, which was, if you look at like the output of all the mammals in the world at moving from point A to point B and how hard it is for one of them to, like, how much energy it takes for them to get from point A to point B, humans are actually pretty low on that scale. But if you get a human being bicycle, they move all the way up to the very front of the
Real
line,
quickly. Yeah.
right? Just like a computer
Yeah.
did that for us in the 90s. And I think that a tool like these AI powered tools are never going to replace the human being. But at the end of the day, it's that tool that can accelerate your ability to do the arduous manual tasks. So
That's great. That's great. Let's talk about your leadership style. Obviously, you led teams at Salesforce. You're leading a team at Parspec. Talk to me about um, some of your key priorities in building, and managing a successful team. What are your ingredients?
So I always think about it in like there's an order of operations that I go through. So it's, do you have the right talent? Then do you have the right focus? And then how are you doing from an execution perspective? It's like that's the framework that I look at it, which is really simple.
Right.
And then once you look at you break each one of those components down. Like at a talent level, are we bringing in a diverse set of point of views and backgrounds in order to take a lot of different approaches to solving similar problems? So, right, like that's a diversity in experience, a diversity in background, diversity in like where you're from, whatever it might be, that those ingredients that will allow us to be able to not see a nail that needs to be hammered the same way 100 times over, regardless of what its
Yeah.
shape or form is, right? So that's one piece. And
Right.
then from like a focus perspective, I think especially for people in a sales role, early on, like your point, you need to work hard in order to figure out how to work smart. And so it's completely
Yeah.
okay for the first 3 to 6 months in a role to just go out and try a lot of new things, see what works. Is this messaging working? Are we going just after a really broad audience? But man, at some point, you're going to have to start to hone that focus, and you're going to have to make a really educated and um, focused decision around, like, here are the 15 things that I need to do in order to have success. I need to get really good at repeating those things and then iterating off of that. Of course, it's not like you're just going to become a machine that is repeating the same process over and over again. But
Right.
there's that shift where you need to go from, let me try everything, to like, these are the things that I'm going to stick with them for a quarter. I'm going to stick with
Most.
them for 6 months, and then we'll iterate off of that because you need to give it enough time. So
Yeah. And your team members, what are some of the qualities you look for the most? I mean, what if you could name off three, what do you really identify are the people who, and even through your career, who have been successful, and the other ones who just haven't quite made it?
I think having a bias towards action is really important. So like if you leave a
Oh,
meeting and you're immediately like, I'm going to go take action on this thing. Like, I'm just going to go run at it. I'm not going to sit there and think and like get caught up in everything. I'm having a bias towards action. I'm going to go run at trying to solve this
like
and see
that.
what happens. That's one thing I've always noticed be successful with sales folks. Obviously, there's the IQ and the EQ. Like, you have to have a certain threshold on both of those in order to be successful. But once you get past that threshold, I'm completely okay. Right? Like,
Yeah.
as long as you have a certain baseline of like, you're a pretty smart person who can understand the dynamics of a room, supercharging that isn't going to get you that much farther. And then, like, I really care about discipline. Like, I look for people
Yeah.
who are disciplined in their life, who are disciplined in their business, and are disciplined in their like like within their relationships that they have. Are they really good
Yeah.
at being able to say, these are the things that matter, this is the hard work that needs to get done, and regardless of if I'm not going to see any positive outcomes for 3 or 6 or 12 months, I'm still going to do like the hard things that aren't necessarily fun, because eventually it'll lead to the right outcomes.
That's the right there. Rewind those back and listen to it. Check if you're listening to this show. Flip that back, because those three are you hit the well, going back to a nail on the head. You hit the nail on the head with those three. I mean, that's fantastic. And if you're a leader and moving into a leadership position, I think those are some of the things that you need to take into account when building a great team. And the one thing I'll add to that, which kind of really lays in with discipline, is consistency. I think if there's one thing that you can see between, at least, and again, I'm a little older than you are, not saying just from that point of the things that you've seen and the things that I've seen, are the people who are the most successful are not the most talented. They're not the ones who have the most knowledge. They're not the ones who have the best skill set. It's always the people, for me, who are the most consistent, right? And
100%.
I think that comes along with discipline too, though. I think consistency and discipline kind of have some tracks that overlay.
An example that I would give there, if for people to just be able to see it in action, I think about like pro sports.
Yeah.
Um, you look at a lot of the kids who are coming out of of high school or college pick a sport, pick the most like
Yep.
visible sports that are out there. There's so many people who have like really high talent and skills that they just wow you, right? They have these physical attributes that just leap out the page. But then, and they start out pretty hot. But if you look at the people that by the end of their career have performed the best, it wasn't necessarily that they had this crazy amount of athleticism or ability or anything like that. It was that they were disciplined and they were consistent and they're intentional with that, right? It wasn't that they just went out there and banged their head against a wall 100 times. They were really intentional about applying their discipline and consistency to perfecting their craft. And like that is what works in sports, and it also is what works in a professional setting too, right?
It's so true. It was actually really eye opening too. I played college football, Division III school, small school, but there was this guy who was a starting quarterback for us, and the guy had a cannon of an arm. He could run like a deer. I mean, he was just phenomenal as an athlete. And then his backup was a guy who just kind of grinded it out every day. But by the end of the year, I mean, through the transition, who do you think was starting at the end of the year? It was the guy who was grinding it out every day. His helmet was kind of crooked. He was a little smaller guy, but his heart and his work ethic and his ability to really persevere and be consistent and be disciplined was the thing that eventually got him through. So I think that's a great analogy. Great way of great perspective in looking at it.
And by the way, that
Great
doesn't mean
perspective.
you have to go work 80 hours a week either, right? Like there's a certain
Right.
like diminishing returns on this labor.
Yeah.
Like we're not out here
Right.
advocating for you to just become completely consumed robot and all you're going to do
Totally.
is burn through. Like you also have to have a life outside of it and like be a well-balanced human being. But when you're at work, are you really intentional, disciplined, and consistent with what you do,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Yeah. Here's a question I just thought of. Like, what? Listen, as a sales leader, working in a big organization and now working in a startup, where do you see the future of sales heading as it goes along? Obviously, with AI and things and technology, you know, where do you see it heading right now?
It's that's a really good question, and ultimately, I think that the tenets that have been important will always be important. It's just the application of those tenets will change. And what I mean by that is, yeah, there will be some automation. Personally, I don't really want to talk to a chat bot when I'm asking questions and trying to figure something out, but that's going to happen a decent amount, right? Like
Yeah.
the emails that are going to get written are going to have AI assistants. I can tell you, I get a ton of them, and the ones that are crafted by a human and then enhanced by an AI bot are really good. The ones that are lazily written by a human being and then just asking an AI to do the personalization are really bad. And I guess my point that I'm making there is like at the end of the day, the best salespeople are people who do their research, who are diligent and consistent, who build really strong relationships built on trust, who don't try to shortcut a customer relationship or shortcut to get a deal done, who do the follow up, who their say do ratio is really high. If they say they're going to do something, they're going to give it to you by a certain time. They do what they said they were going to do, and they drive accountability throughout a process. Like all that is going to be the same. Now, I absolutely think that AI is going to help be able to make your sales presentation more pretty and aesthetically pleasing in less time. So you're not going to be working till midnight trying to tweak the graphics on a deck. Like it'll absolutely help with that. But the substance of like how you got to where you're making that presentation and the conversations and the discovery meetings that you've had and like the due diligence that you've done and the relationship you've built, none of that's going to change. So that's
Yeah.
like, I think the core tenets stay the same, but there's absolutely an opportunity for folks to leverage technology to automate and reduce the amount of time that they spend doing arduous, repetitive tasks. And that
Yeah,
piece, that's great by me, right?
yeah. I think you hit it again. You hit it on the head. What an insightful interview here. I couldn't agree with you more. I think the fundamentals, the core fundamentals of what it takes to be successful in the sales profession or the business profession as a whole aren't really going to change. It's just the way that you're going to approach it to be more efficient if you use the tools correctly. Again, correctly, like you said, don't write me an email on connecting with a customer, right? And then spits out this email with a bunch of words that person never uses. You can tell right away.
Yeah. Don't drop my LinkedIn profile into the chat GPT and say, write me an email based upon if I'm this company, because it will come up with some really bad recommendations. But at the same time, on the flip side of that, though, my challenge to everyone out there is do embrace that technology, because if other people are able to accelerate their rate of work by 30% or by 20% and you can't, that means you're either going to have to work 30% harder to keep up, or you're going to get passed up over time. So it's not that you shouldn't be embracing these tools. It's that you still do all the core fundamentals that make you good at what you do and have those foundations while embracing the tool, that like technology that's out there.
Exactly. It's the definition of a tool, right? You've just got to use it in the right way. You gotta direct your teams and arm your teams, and then you got to make sure that you use the tools that you have in the most effective way. And AI is a great, fantastic, amazing lifetime tool that has been created. I mean, in our lifetime is unbelievable. But again, you've got to be able to know how to use the tool. It's like anything. All right, a
Oh,
couple more questions. Listen, this
really
go
quick,
ahead. Yeah,
actually.
go ahead.
I have one other quick observation on the what will be successful and what won't. One of the things I noticed during the
Yeah.
pandemic, there's a lot
Okay.
of different sellers that are successful out there, right? There's the relationship builder, there's the schmoozer, there's the person who is like a really good task manager, there's a challenger, there's all these different profiles.
Yeah.
One
Yeah.
thing that I noticed during the pandemic was the people that rely too heavily on the relationship aspect versus adding value from a business perspective, that started to fade away a little bit, because during the
Yeah.
pandemic there wasn't the opportunity to go out and take someone to the golf course as much, or to take them to the fancy dinner and to like, really relate to what was going on in their personal life. That's still a requirement, don't get me wrong, but I think that more and more, as the more information becomes readily available, as these processes get streamlined for doing technology evaluations or evaluating mechanical tools or whatever it might be, the more people that can like harness the ability to add value in the process of providing more relevant information and doing the follow-up that there is being asked of them, and being a trusted advisor in a business setting, that's going to continue to be a little bit higher of a premium than the person who is so focused on just being buddy with folks. That's just one observation I've seen over time.
I agree. And it doesn't always have to be sell either. I mean, it can just be, hey, I came across this art, came across this information. I thought I'd share it with you, right? Like, I think that has gone by the wayside totally, at least in the organizations that I've worked with. And listen, it all starts from the top anyway, on the pressure to get sales and build revenue and all that kind of stuff. But realize that when your pipeline is, I always say the pipeline is the lifeline. And when you're cultivating a pipeline, you have to have sometimes just content to help people. Just, it doesn't have to always be sell. So I think
Absolutely.
that's a good point. It's a good point. All right. Listen, this has been a fantastic interview. I really enjoyed it. A couple more questions before I go.
Sure.
First one, what advice would you give to a professional who's looking to level up in an organization or take on a new challenge in their career? Would you, again, I think it goes back to listening to yourself, however many years back. Again, you're a young guy, but what would you give advice for someone who either wants to level up or looking to do it, or may have an opportunity to do it?
Yeah, I think there's nothing like trying to find ways to replicate the environment that you're going to walk into to give yourself that confidence in doing it, right? So like, I hear a bunch of people say, I could do this thing, and you absolutely probably could. Why don't you go try to figure it out? Like moonlight, trying to like test out the environment, like
Yeah.
do a dry run with your friends of what that job would be like, right? Like, uh, I got this great piece of advice from a mentor who always shows up extremely prepared. but it doesn't seem like they're prepared. They're the most polished, disciplined person out there. And then you ask them, like, how is it? Are you just naturally really polished, and are you always on the nose with any question that might come up? It's like, no, I practiced the heck out of it the night before and the day before and everything like that. Like, I dry run every single scenario that I could be put into. So one piece of advice is, if you're trying to make that leap in your career, like, nothing to your point beats like putting in some work ahead of time to be the most prepared person for a situation, rather than just hypothesizing around what you would do in a given situation. So that's one thing. And again, like, I lean too heavily on this, but I can't reiterate enough. Like, have a good circle of people around you that you are the average of the 5 people you spend your time with. And so if you're going for that big career move or big position that you might be going after, like, go try to really spend time to get the perspective of people who have been there, done that, or can help you out along the way.
Great, man. Great advice. Jay, where can people find you? If they have questions for you, they want to reach out, they want to ask you about AI, they want to ask you about just career, maybe you'll be that mentor for them. Who knows? But where can they find you?
Yeah, absolutely. Easiest place is probably LinkedIn. That's where I spend most of my time. So Jay Pettigrew on, let's see here. I can drop my LinkedIn link here. I'm on X as well if you want to, but yeah, add me on LinkedIn, shoot me an in-mail or a message or something like that, and I'm more than happy to engage and see if there's anything I can help out with, or any type of conversations we can have.
Fantastic. Listen, I told you we have the most insightful leaders here, and this guy has been, Jay, it's been great having you on the show. I think you've offered some fantastic insight, not only things that have happened to you, but also your perspective on some of the people you work with in your leadership. So I really want to thank you for being on the show, Unfinished Business. And you know what? I want to check in back, down the road with you and see how things are going. And maybe probably the next time we talk, your company's going to be like triple the size. But ultimately, listen, man, I want to thank you for being here. Thanks for being on the show. Everybody, we appreciate your support. Like this show, share this show, Unfinished Business, and we will see you next time. Jay, thanks for being here.
Unfinished Business Podcast Show with your host, David Slyman.